Despite what most people think, building muscle is actually quite simple. Over the past 3 years, I've completely transformed my physique and built what I estimate to be around 20 pounds of muscle. And contrary to what I originally believed when I first got into this, it didn't actually require complicated routines, 2-hour workouts, or a cabinet full of supplements. In fact, most people are actually pretty surprised when they hear what actually worked. Because the reality is, this fitness industry often makes things sound far more complicated than they actually need to be. And so in this video, I'm going to simplify the process of building a lean, aesthetic physique so that you can focus on the things that actually make a difference instead of constantly second guessing whether you're doing the right thing. So if you're someone whose goal is to build a physique that looks good both in and out of clothes, this will give you a clear framework that you can rely on long term. When I first started lifting all the way back in 2022, I was immediately exposed to the constant noise that exists in this fitness space. One person will say that you need to train 6 days a week, and then another will say that 2 is enough. Then one person will say that you need to bulk aggressively, and then another says bulking will just make you fat and that you don't actually need to do it to build muscle. It seemed like every piece of advice was just contradicting each other. And whenever you're new to something, all of that information overload just creates this constant doubt in your mind because you never know what you actually need to be doing. You start wondering if you're always doing the wrong thing. When you bulk, you worry that maybe you shouldn't have. When you choose dumbbells, you wonder if barbells would have been a better choice. You just start to second guess every single decision. And that's exactly what happened to me. Every time I picked one split, I would think that I needed to do another. I always thought I was doing the wrong exercise, or I was always wondering if maybe there was something more optimal that I could have been doing. So what I'm trying to say is, if you feel stuck, it usually isn't because you're lazy or because you have bad genetics. It's not something internal within you that's causing the problem. The problem is that you keep changing direction every time you watch a new video and it tells you that what you're currently doing is no longer optimal. One week, your favorite chest exercise is considered S tier. The next week, it gets pushed down to A tier. And suddenly, you feel like you need to change everything to keep making progress. I know how that feels more than anyone. But ironically, constantly switching your routine to chase the optimal thing is the actual thing that's slowing down your progress. Just choosing a plan, even if it's suboptimal, and sticking with it for a long period of time will almost always produce better results than constantly chasing the most optimal method. It's really always been that simple. And if you're watching this video, you probably don't really care about becoming a professional bodybuilder or just building as much muscle mass as possible. You just want to build a lean, aesthetic physique that looks good in clothes and with your shirt off. Rounded shoulders, square chest, wide lats, visible abs, a physique that looks impressive in everyday life. And my goal is to simplify that process so that you can actually achieve that. So the first thing I'm going to discuss is training. Personally, I only train 3 days per week, and recently I've been experimenting with 2 as well, and it's still been working very well. And you may think that that's probably too little, and you may be right, but what I've noticed is that for most people, the number of days you train is rarely the limiting factor. It's the quality of their training that's making them suffer. Muscle growth is a response to quality, not quantity. And the quality and quantity of your training has an inverse relationship. The higher and higher that your quality increases, the lower and lower the quantity that you require to get the same results decreases. And once you truly learn how to maximize that quality and you master that skill, 2 to 3 sessions per week is plenty to build muscle. Now, what do I mean when I say quality? What actually is that? Well, it comes down to 2 things: intensity and technique. Intensity simply means pushing your sets hard enough so that your reps noticeably slow down toward the end of the set. And sometimes slowing down so much that the weight just stops moving on your last rep, also known as muscular failure. This high level of intensity is what actually stimulates muscle growth. Now, technique is what allows you to maximize the amount of tension placed on any given muscle. The better your control and ability to target a certain muscle group, the more stimulus it will receive, and then the more it will grow as a result. Now, when you combine high intensity with high quality technique, progress is basically inevitable at that point because muscle growth ultimately comes from getting stronger over time. However, muscles don't care about how many days per week you train. For example, if we compare 2 guys, one who only trains once per week and one who trains 7 days per week. If the guy who only trains once per week adds 50 pounds to his bench press over the course of the next 6 months, while the guy who trains 7 days per week only adds 10 pounds to his bench press, the first guy built way more muscle, regardless of how much time he spent in the gym. There is no direct correlation with how much time you spend in the gym and how much muscle you build. Trying to compensate for low quality by simply doing more quantity is just a recipe to spin your wheels. Because once your quality drops below a certain threshold, meaning your intensity is very far from muscular failure and your technique is very poor, there's no amount of quantity that can compensate for it. And another thing that you have to consider is that most people have busy schedules, which means their sleep isn't always perfect, their nutrition isn't always perfect, their stress isn't always managed. And all of these imperfections make extremely high training frequencies beyond 4 to 5 days very difficult to sustain long term. Now let's talk about diet. I'll just be straight up. For optimal muscle growth, your body needs a calorie surplus. But many people interpret this as an excuse to just eat everything in sight, which usually results in unnecessary body fat gain. A much better approach is maintaining a small, consistent surplus of around 300 to 500 calories per day, while consuming approximately 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. This provides enough energy to build muscle efficiently while minimizing fat gain. One of the biggest advantages to this approach is that your diet doesn't need to drastically change between bulking and cutting phases. The foods can mostly stay the same. Only the portion sizes change. 300 calories isn't a large adjustment. It could simply mean adding a few eggs at breakfast or a few tablespoons of peanut butter to a protein shake. And if you're currently carrying excess body fat, then you don't need to bulk right now. Stored body fat is simply stored energy. Your body can use that energy to support muscle growth while you gradually lose fat through a calorie deficit. So bulking is mostly reserved for guys who are underweight or don't carry that much body fat. Now let's talk about recovery and lifestyle factors that significantly impact muscle growth. The most important of these is sleep. Sleep is essentially your body's natural steroid. And what I found in my personal experience is that one of the simplest ways to improve sleep quality is getting sunlight early in the day and then avoiding screens late at night. As you've probably seen somewhere on the internet by now, morning sunlight helps regulate your circadian rhythm, which is essentially your internal biological clock. For some reason, this is just the way we work, but once your body receives that signal early in the day, that bright sunlight, it just becomes so much easier to feel naturally tired later on in the evening. And the difference for me now is night and day compared to when I was younger and in school. I'd always feel exhausted when I got home in the afternoons, but then wide awake late at night. And the reason for that is because when you're in school, you're basically just spending the entire day under artificial lighting and not getting any sunlight. This is why reducing blue light exposure later on into the evenings significantly improves sleep quality. Personally, I noticed a large improvement after using blue light blocking glasses later into the evening. So I highly recommend getting a pair of those if you can't get away from the screens later on into the evening. Now, another factor that interferes with your sleep significantly that most people are guilty of is consuming way too much caffeine. Now, while caffeine can improve your workout performance, consuming too much too late in the day, specifically after work to get your lift in later on in the evening, will absolutely impact your sleep quality because the half-life of caffeine is greater than 6 hours. If you do still insist on consuming caffeine, I'd recommend keeping it before 12 p.m. This way it'll be out of your system by nighttime. At the end of the day, building muscle is a very forgiving adaptation. It doesn't require perfect conditions. You don't need perfect programs, perfect genetics, and you definitely don't need to be searching for a new, better method every single week. You just need a plan that you can stick to. Train hard a few times per week, focus on getting stronger over time, eat enough to support growth, sleep well, and repeat that process for long enough to let the results accumulate. Because the people who build the best physiques aren't the ones who find the most complicated strategies. They're the ones who just stayed consistent with the simple ones. Now, muscle is built very slowly, and it does take quite a long time, but the good news is that the habits required to actually build it are actually pretty manageable. And once those habits become a part of your lifestyle, staying in shape becomes far easier than most people expect. So instead of constantly looking for a better method, focus on executing the fundamentals as well as you possibly can. And that's not only what allows you to build a physique that looks good, but one that lasts forever.